The podcast is Going to the Conspiracy, featuring Auckland's Josh Addison and Bucharest's Dr. Matthew R. X. Dentith.
Hello, you're listening to the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy. My name's Josh Addison, sitting here in Auckland, New Zealand, and all the way across the world in Bucharest, Romania. Bucharest? I'm paranoid now.
Yes,
It's Bucharest.
No,
yep.
Got it right. It is Bucharest.
I said Budapest once, and it's going to haunt me for the rest of my life. Bucharest,
Indeed.
Romania.
In fact, when you die, that will be the one thing I'll mention at your funeral.
That will be what's chiselled on my gravestone. I meant Bucharest. But anyway, in Bucharest, it's Dr. Matthew Dentith.
Hello.
So this episode is going to be a good old-fashioned ego stroke for you, isn't it, Matthew?
It's going to be vainglorious.
We'll be stroking your ego quite furiously. Yes.
Oh yes, my throbbing ego is going to get what it deserves.
And how? Do you have any more increasingly sexual references you'd like to make, or?
No, I was hoping you would continue, and then I would just burst with joy all over the screen, as I did on the page when I wrote the article we're going to be talking about. Oh, my throbbing passion for conspiracy theories is spewed all over the place, and many people are enjoying it.
Well, that's definitely true. No one could argue.
I've seeded a lot of ideas.
Spread your seed good and wide.
I think what I've produced will cause a certain amount of mental pregnancy, which will produce good ideas in, let's say, 7 to 9 months.
And then your little idea babies will rise up against us and control the world.
Demand child support, and it'll be terrible. I really probably should never have written the paper in the first place.
No. Although I now have visions of a Children of the Corn style. Village of the Damned style scenario of Matthew's idea babies, golden-haired, staring at us eerily before making our minds explode with their own
Although that doesn't make me think that's an obvious crossover that no one did. Village of the Damned versus Children of the Corn.
It'd be like...
I mean, that kind of writes itself.
It'd be like The Ring meets The Grudge, only good. I didn't actually see The Ring Sadako versus What's-Her-Face, but I understand it wasn't much good.
Well, basically all of the sequels to Ringu have been pretty terrible, and most of the sequels to The Grudge have been fairly disastrous. So the idea of taking two bad sequel franchises and then mashing them together, that's not a brilliant idea. In fact, it kind of seems like So we've got franchises that aren't making any money. Is there any way to make money from these franchises? Well, we could try to double the audience. Oh, tell me how. Let's join two franchises together. Okay. And that's basically as far as they got before they went, who cares about that? Write a script.
Did you see the sequelizers replied to my email?
No, I did not see the sequelizers replied to your email. Tell me about the sequelizers replying to your email.
Having put me on to the Sequelizers podcast, which is a podcast where a bunch of guys look at films, great films that had lousy sequels, and think about how they could do things better. The most recent episode, having finished their sort of first season of the podcast, they did an episode on feedback and read out various bits of feedback they'd received and responded to them. And among them was mine.
I haven't listened to that episode yet.
Well, there
I
you
might
go.
listen to that this afternoon. How exciting!
It is. So here I am, a 41-year-old man, father of two, professional individual, going, some guys on a podcast liked my email. So essentially, Matthew, having put me onto them.
Us.
Well, they could, yep, and they have a little bit in the past, from time to time.
Yeah, about
it's happened.
Once every 30 episodes we get some reader feedback.
On average, yes. That email being
reader
podcast...
feedback. I didn't even realise people were reading our podcast. I
well,
said listener feedback.
Listener feedback would make more sense, yes. But podcastconspiracy@gmail.com. I'm pretty sure it's in the little sting at the end, but it probably doesn't hurt to mention it a few more times. Podcastconspiracy@gmail.com.
That's podcastconspiracy@gmail.com.
Right. That's possibly enough rambling, perhaps. We've covered thinly veiled sexual imagery. We've covered pop culture references. Maybe it's just time to get straight into the news.
We've covered contact details, so yes. Let's move or slide into the news.
Breaking conspiracy theories in the news.
Right, well, that Julian Assange, haven't heard much from him lately. Stuck in. Is he still in his Ecuadorian closet, or has he got out now that some of the statutes of limitation have... I honestly haven't
So I
kept
believe
up with
for the
man.
sheer fact that he absconded from justice from the British authorities
So they're still
means that
after him.
even though Sweden are going, we're no longer interested in interviewing him, the British are going, yeah, at the same time, he escaped bail, and that's an offence within our realm. So we would still like to talk to Mr. Assange about breaking the law in the UK. So he says, as far as I'm aware, he's still stuck in the bit of Ecuador which is conveniently located in London, UK.
Right, well that does explain why he's still seeming a little stir-crazy and saying increasingly interesting things. In this case, in reference to the big eclipse that happened across the United States earlier this week, Julian Assange at one point tweeted that no harm can come from looking at the eclipse when the sun is covered, and this whole "don't look at the sun" thing, it's all just a ploy by glasses manufacturers to flog their cheap eclipse sunglasses. And people have pointed out, well, okay, yes, at the point when the moon completely blocks out the sun, yes, you could look directly at that and not hurt your eyes, but for most people viewing the eclipse, at no point was the moon going to completely block out the sun, and even at those points where they were directly in the line of it, that would only be for a very short amount of time. So suggesting that it's okay to look at the eclipse is just plain a silly thing to say.
I actually have really no comment to make on this other than the fact that Julian Assange is yet another example of someone who is speaking well outside their expertise, and yet because they have a platform, people take what they say seriously, when actually if that were Joe Blog or Jane Doe down the office, you'd end up going, don't be stupid. But Julian Assange has a platform, and so these things end up being treated seriously by portions of the population. So whether or not he's talking about a conspiracy here by big eyewear, the more important thing is, why does he think he actually needs to make these claims? Has he got a WikiLeaks dump about big eyewear spending several years of prepping people to wear special eyewear to watch the eclipse?
I assume he literally has nothing better to do.
I saw that President Trump decided to look into the eclipse without any accompanying eyewear. He and Assange seem to have a very special connection.
Yes, now speaking of another controversy that Trump has been involved in as well, the whole Charlottesville business and protests and counter-protests and all the unpleasantness that went on there. So I understand there's been a few dodgy claims and doctored photos and that sort of bizzo going on.
Yes, so there was a very famous image of an Antifa protester appearing to assault a police officer, and actually it turns out that that image was doctored, so the image did not present what the people who presented the image actually said. And what's interesting about both the Charlottesville protests and also the other protests which have been occurring, say, in Boston, is that there are an awful lot of images out there, some of which have been doctored, and some of which are images from earlier protests, in fact, in one case, a protest from 30 years prior, being presented as contemporary images. Now, in some cases, where, let's say, a photo of an African-American woman confronting a police officer from 30 years ago is being mistaken for a photo from today, that might be a case of someone quite legitimately going, here's an image of a protest that looks modern, ipso facto it must be, not realizing that actually it's an old photo. But in the case of the doctored photo, someone or some set of people has to have gone out quite deliberately to doctor the image and then use that image to presumably stir up antipathy towards the Antifa protesters. Although conversely, there are also conspiracy theories going around where the Antifa protesters doctored the image in the first place to give them a talking point to attack the alt-right. But
Yeah.
that's what happens when you have doctored images. There are going to be conspiracy theories as to why the image was doctored in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, in the particular one that people have been talking about, the doctoring was that it was a photo from a different protest completely that showed a person in a leather jacket assaulting a police officer, and then they went and photoshopped the Antifa logo onto the back of this guy's jacket. But I saw another one of a bunch of people lined up with one of them holding like a big stick of wood with a nail in the end, and people saying, look, this was one of the Antifa protesters holding a big stick with a nail, don't tell me they were protesting peacefully. And people are like, well, no, that one was from 2015, I think, in Dublin, or an entirely different protest. But yes, then you can just get claiming, counterclaim, and false flag, false flag, false flag. More on false flags later.
Indeed.
Now let's move to Cuba, Matthew. Let's move to Cuba.
The best time to move to Cuba, as we know, as citizens of Aotearoa, New Zealand, is April, because you want the April sun in Cuba.
That will make sense to our New Zealand listeners, probably not anyone else, can't be bothered explaining.
Not at all.
Yes, I saw an article today just about the American and Canadian diplomats in Cuba have been coming down with various symptoms involving nausea and ringing in the ears and sleeplessness and so on, severe enough that some of them have actually been leaving the country. And people claim that this is a result of people aiming some sort of sonic weapon at the American and Canadian embassies in Cuba. So the Cuban authorities have denied this. They've said they have very explicitly, quite explicit statements that we were not going to interfere with American, diplomats here. America, it was only just under Obama that America opened up diplomatic relations with them. So I think the authorities have said that they are completely opposed to anything that might antagonize the American diplomats, although apparently certain elements within Cuba haven't been happy about it, because there has been instances of vandalism and things like that, of people making a nuisance of themselves. But yes, certainly that now it's actually moved to the realms of people have been employing some sort of sonic weapon directly at them. Nobody's like, these things exist, don't they? I mean, we've had those various crowd control type sonic cannon-y things.
And of course there is the famous mosquito device that's designed to make sure teenagers don't hang around your shop, thus destroying the economy of your local corner store.
But at the moment all people have sort of said that these symptoms have been caused by something that could have been caused by some sort of sonic weapony thing. We have no evidence of that, or that even if this was caused by some sort of sonic vibration, whether it was specifically a weapon pointed at them or if it was something weird generating these sonic vibrations, we don't know. But it's an interesting conspiracy theory, I guess. Sonic weapons, kind of cool.
Although I have to say the symptoms are delightfully vague.
Well, they do seem to be quite wide-ranging, yes.
Yes, you could but you're down to, look, there's bad water being supplied, or just in the US and Canadian embassies, and that's the kind of thing that might cause some of these symptoms as well. The fact that people have jumped towards sonic weapons as opposed to more prosaic explanations is kind of interesting. How developed is the Cuban sonic weaponry system? That's what I want to know.
Yes, people have the right to know. But in the meantime, someone who has been investigated fairly thoroughly is Paul Manafort, I understand.
Yes, so Paul Manafort, who was part of the Trump campaign to make Trump the greatest American president of all time, has had his house raided by the FBI. And this is interesting because Manafort's role in the campaign was fairly short-lived, but has been a focal point for the investigation into the Trump campaign's potential collusion with the Russians. And so the Mueller investigation has been focusing quite heavily on Manafort. Now, there was a rumor going around that Manafort had basically flipped on Trump and was providing the FBI with the information they needed to continue their investigation. The fact there was a morning raid on Paul Manafort's house indicates that possibly isn't true. That indicates that maybe Manafort hasn't flipped on the Trump. On the Trump.
On the Trump.
There we go.
He calls himself the
Trump.
Donald. Why not the Trump?
Yeah, why not call him the Trump?
Exactly.
Why not? So yes, it indicates that maybe he hasn't flipped, and Mueller is using the FBI raid to basically pressure Mueller to give him the information required. Also, it indicates that maybe Mueller was in the process or about to get rid of evidence, and so the FBI raid was necessary to secure that evidence. But as commentators have pointed out, you can't just get the FBI to raid someone's house. You actually need a subpoena to do it. So Mueller and company must have gone to a judge and presented fairly convincing. Come
across all Australian for a moment.
Oh, or even South African, truth be told. Very convincing evidence of some criminal wrongdoing, which indicates that we might be seeing an escalation in the investigation, accidental rhyming there, which indicates that things might be coming to a head in the investigation of the Trump campaign.
Well, from a serious topic to one a little more light-hearted, you may or may not have seen the videos of Alex Jones.
Oh, I have seen it. I've watched it several times.
Walking around Seattle and being soundly abused by its population. And at one point, so people were flipping him off. People were yelling abuse at him. He was determinedly chasing after them and trying to get them to stand up for themselves. To which they usually just flipped him off and abused him some more.
He can run at a rate of knots. He's quite fast.
He is. Well, does he still? I mean, he used to be very much the muscle-bound Jim Bunny type. You must have seen the photos of young Alex Jones. He was quite the beefcake.
I was actually surprised by just how quickly he was able to chase people down the road. I would not want to flip off Alex Jones. I don't think he'd be able to escape.
Well, no, but as we saw when he caught up with people, they'd still just tell him to bugger off and keep on walking anyway. But the most confronting thing was when a man actually walked up to him and threw a cup of coffee in his face, and walked off again. And people sort of, as they do whenever something like this happens, immediately jumped on the internet to try and work out who this guy was who'd been throwing coffee at Alex Jones, and found out that he was a local. He's an aspiring actor. He's acted in a few things, and he's currently working as the manager in a pro wrestling organization, which prompted a lot of people to say, "Hang on, so this guy who came up and made a big show of showing how beleaguered and Alex Jones is and how oppressive the leftist forces raised against him are, was a professional actor. I smell a setup. I smell, dare I say it, a false flag." The suggesting that the whole thing was a setup, and the purpose of it was Alex Jones set up this attack on himself so that he could say, look at all these damn liberals and lefties, look how intolerant they are, look how evil they are, look how persecuted I am. Of course, the competing theory to that, you could say, of course, well, the guy is a wannabe actor, into professional wrestling, wants to be famous. Surely it's not a big stretch to assume that a person like that would see a camera rolling and someone who a lot of people pay attention to, namely Alex Jones, standing there, and would not be able to resist leaping in front of the camera to try and get a bit of attention for himself. So I think the fact that the guy is an aspiring actor could probably go both ways, just like.
And it would also explain. Oh, nicely played, sir. Nicely played. It would also explain the weirdness of that incident, because when I watched it, well before I heard about the notion that this person was an actor and maybe it was a false flag event of some particular kind, it kind of seems somewhat forced. There's something really weird about the way that Alex Jones's interlocutor talks with him in a way which either looks scripted, or the person in this case is going out of their way to be overly dramatic when they're talking with Alex Jones. So I found that bit a bit suspicious to watch in the first place. The fact he turns out to be an actor makes me go, on one level, now I go, the false flag is plausible. Maybe Alex Jones did in fact employ someone to attack him to make him look as if he's beleaguered. Or at the same time, this guy's an actor. That probably explains why he acted so weirdly around Alex Jones, because as we know, actors are slightly weird. But I think the best thing about the story is that when the Austin Chronicle reported upon it, they ended their report with the following line. The final word may go to the Seattle Police Department, which tweeted that there had been no official reports about Jones yelling at strangers or being assaulted, and that, as far as we know, that could be an actor playing Alex Jones.
Oh, we're through the looking glass now, Matthew.
Oh yes, it's Alex. Is Alex Jones really Alex Jones? It is the eternal question.
Well, haven't we shown that he's Bill Hicks and also Beau Bridges at the same time?
And maybe also Rush Limbaugh is in fact Jim Morrison. That's something we actually haven't mentioned, but there's an entire conspiracy theory that goes around that Jim Morrison didn't die. Jim Morrison became Rush Limbaugh. And the thing is, if you compare photos of Jim Morrison close to his apparent death and photos of Rush Limbaugh today, they look remarkably similar. Conspiracy?
Yes.
I think so.
Righto. Well, we've started silly, so let's finish silly. Tell me about Chipotle conspiracy theories, and also, is that how you pronounce Chipotle?
I have no idea.
Okay. Well, it works
no
for
idea.
me.
I have a bottle of Chipotle, as I'm going to call it, sauce in my apartment, which I bought recently. But apparently, Chipotle's been having a bit of an issue in the US due to a large number of norovirus outbreaks in many of their restaurants. And this has led to their stocks plummeting, and thus people who short those stocks actually making an absolute mint. People are talking within the realm of $50 to $65 million of losses to Chipotle, which have gone to the people who have shorted those stocks. And so Aaron Allen, a principal at Aaron Allen and Associates, has claimed on LinkedIn that though it might seem far-fetched, there are some facts that suggest the near-endless food safety scandals plaguing Chipotle belie something more sinister than simple misfortune. And he goes on to cite past incidents of companies being targeted in bizarre plots, including a case in 2005 where a woman planted a severed finger of her husband's co-worker in a cup of Wendy's chili, and thus is suggesting that maybe there is a targeted plan by individuals unknown to cause issue for Chipotle, which may well be affecting the stock prices, indicating some kind of criminal collusion or conspiracy. Now, admittedly, the article in question, which is in Business Insider, then goes on to quote our friends at Natural News, claiming that these attacks are the result of the biotech industry unleashing bioterrorism attacks against the only fast food company that has publicly denounced GMOs.
Is that true? Do you know?
It's reported on Natural News, so I automatically assume it must be false. But I think I have actually heard something along the lines of Chipotle going for only natural ingredients, as far as fast food chains rely on natural ingredients.
Right, so you've got who are GMOs? Big agriculture?
Yeah, big genetically modified organisms, the giants in the agriculture industry, presumably literal giants because they've modified their genes.
Big pharma, if you will, which makes sense in a New Zealand accent where you can't.
Pharma.
If we were American, you'd hear the R on the end, but you can't because New Zealand is a non-rhotic dialect, and we don't pronounce the letter R unless it's immediately followed by a vowel sound. There's your linguistics fact of the day.
Yay!
And that's the end of the news. That is all the news that's fit to print or indeed talk about on this particular podcast.
Or in this case, consume and get a norovirus.
Right, well, shall we take a quick break, do a bit of stretching and limbering up, and then come back here and start stroking your ego till we both go blind?
Yes, let's go blind and talk about my new paper.
Now, I should be clear that the reason why we'll be going blind, stroking Matthew's ego in this way, is that I intend to be stabbing myself in the face the entire time. Obviously, that's a lie, which I could have got away with if we were just recording a podcast, but because we're doing videos as well, it's not really going to work at all. We're recording these as videos, by the way. I've mentioned it a few times, but I might as well plug them again as well. If you go looking for the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy on YouTube, you will see the two of us staring blankly into a camera with our cold, dead eyes as we say the words that you are now hearing right now in your podcast listening device-icle.
Although I do think when I get back, we should actually do something slightly more ambitious with the video. So
we could
have some kind of set, and so we can sit there and we can chat, and maybe make the video, at least for the 5 months I'll be home, the definitive form of the podcast, as opposed to its basically mutant sibling that no one ever talks about in polite company.
It would be a nice change to have sort of proper video of us instead of video capture of a Skype call with all the attendant loss of quality issues and voice out of syncy issues as well. But anyway, we're not here to complain about the inadequacies of Skype. We're here to claim about the adequacies of Dr. Matthew Dentith. And
I like what you did there. I see the way you twisted the inadequacies of Microsoft into the adequacies of Springer Verlag Publishing.
If there's one word I'd like to use to describe Matthew, that word is adequate.
Yes, I must. Actually, that reminds me of one of my favourite episodes of Newsradio, where the Phil Hartman character gets a review saying that he's an adequate broadcaster, and he spends the entire episode trying to maintain that adequate is the most superlative compliment you can get, and then goes, "Yes, I'm full of adequatatious. I'm full of adequatotiousness." Yes, and it's absolutely. So I'm going to do what I do best: adequate work.
Matthew, by the way, is an enormous fan of Newsradio. Probably worth pointing out.
Yes, it is possibly the greatest sitcom of all time.
More a fan of Better Off Ted, to be honest.
Better Off Ted is fantastic. I think the especially the early episodes of Better Off Ted, it's just an amazing show to watch. But I think Newsradio is more consistent across its run.
And it did manage to go for longer as well. Assuming we don't count the final season with John Lovitz, or do you reckon the...
Well, the thing is, even though the final season with John Lovitz isn't brilliant, the first episode of season 5, the one where they deal with the death of Phil Hartman, is heartbreakingly funny, because it's quite obvious a case of the actors still mourning the fact their friend is dead, doing an episode where the character has died, and it's in turn heartbreaking and hilarious, and I wouldn't ever want that episode to go away. So even though there is no Phil Hartman, his presence really is felt in that particular episode.
Right, well, we're not here to talk about Newsradio for another 2 hours, although we could. We're here to talk about Matthew's new articles. So, quick off the top. What's the article called? Where's it published? And give us the 30-second elevator pitch, executive summary, if you will.
So the article is called "Conspiracy Theories on the Basis of the Evidence." It's been published in Synthese. It actually came out online yesterday. Synthese is one of the top philosophy journals, so I'm quite chuffed to have been published there. And the article itself deals with evidential issues, because there is a certain opprobrium directed towards conspiracy theorists in the way they use their evidence. I argue that this opprobrium is misplaced, because conspiracy theorists' use of evidence is not straightforwardly problematic in the way that many people make it out to be. And B, the opprobrium is misplaced for the sheer fact that the kinds of evidence conspiracy theorists are laughed at for using are also kinds of evidence that are routinely used to disprove or debunk conspiracy theories. So I think there's a double standard here. When a conspiracy theorist uses this kind of evidence, that's said to be bad, but when we use that evidence against a conspiracy theorist and her theory, we seem to have no problem with it.
So, I mean, this obviously fits in with the work you've done in the past and that we've talked about here in attempting to possibly rehabilitate the notion of conspiracy theories, or at least try to steer the popular conception of them away from the more pejorative use of conspiracy theory and conspiracy theorist. Is this... Would you call this sort of because I mean, you have talked about evidence before in the past. We did a whole podcast episode about evidence a little while ago. Would you call this, like, are you sort of moving in a new direction with this, or is this simply you've just taken one aspect of that you've talked about before and really just sort of focused in on that one aspect?
So this is a natural extension of the work that I engaged in the PhD and then the book from 2014, The Philosophy of Conspiracy Theories, in that I've talked about evidence in the past, but I've kind of gone further with the analysis in this particular paper. So it's not me branching in a new direction, it's me basically solidifying the work I've already done. Now, the reason why this paper exists is that I gave a keynote actually, at a conference in Padova back in November of last year. And I gave a talk looking at the way in which evidence is used by conspiracy theorists, and also the way that we talk about expertise when it comes to judging that evidence. Now, when it came to finalizing the talk I gave after the conference, I discovered that my lovely 1 hour presentation had ballooned into about 14,000 words, so I chopped the paper in half, made one half of the paper be about evidence, which I sent off to Synthese and has been accepted for publication, and the other half of the paper, which is potentially more novel because it goes beyond the work from the PhD in the book, on the way we talk about expertise and how we might talk about expertise with respect to these things called conspiracy theories, is currently under review at another journal at this particular point in time. So it's part of a moving towards a more novel discussion of expertise, but it's also a solidification of previous work I've done.
Solidification. Sounds saucy.
Just like your mum.
Touché. I need to start a little your mum count scoreboard counter thing on the videos now. Actually, I think we need a little tick every time one of us gets the other. Now, this sort of leads into what I was going to ask next, which perhaps you know, because presumably you have my list of questions in front of you, just as they are in front of me.
Indeed.
But yeah, so the process of how this came about, I've read the article. I've read it all the way to the end. And at the end,
well done.
I did, and at the end there's a list of acknowledgements, which so I very definitely did read all the way down and not just skip to the end and see this one bit that I'm now going to talk about. So you mentioned a bunch of contributors, and you also mentioned now that this was the ScienCons conference. That's the one you were talking about.
It was indeed.
Before, yeah. So, like, did this come out of the work you'd already done in preparing for that, or how much was it shaped by the talks and the panels and what have you that you did there?
I mean, that's a good question, because of course the whole thing about being a working academic is that you don't just write in isolation. You attend conferences, you have conversations with your peers, and part of those conversations are always going to inform the kind of discussions you have. So, for example, one thing which I get from talking with my peers is new and exotic examples to work with. So I'm using a lot more in the way of Romanian-based examples at the moment in my work, for the sheer fact I'm in Romania. I'm finding out about those Romanian examples, and I'm quite deliberately trying to use examples that go beyond the standard ones we find in the literature. So, yes, you're always being informed by conversations you have with your peers. When it comes to acknowledgements, it's actually quite difficult to work out where to stop and start with acknowledgements. So I've had thousands of conversations with many dozens of individuals over the last year which deal with talk of these things called conspiracy theories. And it's quite plausible to imagine that many of the points I make in my writings now actually come from either direct questions or indirect discussions about those points in those conversations. And of course, there's no way for me to track those things, because you may not even be aware that because of that conversation, your thoughts or feelings on the topic have moved in a particular direction. So in this particular case, the acknowledgements go out directly to people who gave me feedback on the paper prior to publication, either with respect to my putting it up online on academia.edu and getting comments on that draft, or the fact that there were questions after the presentation of the paper at the conference in Padova, and some of those questions led me to reconsider some of my points, or in some cases knuckle down on some of the analysis, go, yes, I'm fairly sure I've got this right.
Right, well now I'm going to go beyond proving that I've just skipped to the end of your paper and read what was there. I've also, at the very least, as far as you know, read the section headings all the way through your paper, in that you talk what seemed to be the bulk of it, the middle section of it, was where you go through a whole bunch of different kinds of evidence which people have taken issue with in the past. Actually, so from according to my note taking, you talked about selective evidence, you talk about errant evidence, you talk about lucky or fortunate/fortuitous evidence, false evidence, secret evidence. Perhaps it might be an idea. Could you quickly give us a rundown of what you mean by each of these types of evidence that people take issue with?
Okay, so selective evidence is simply a feature of the way that we present evidence in favor or disfavor of hypotheses. So if I want to tell you a story about what I had for breakfast this morning, I can change the story depending on the kind of audience I want to present it to. If I want to show that I live a very, very loose lifestyle, I might present all the facts about what I had for breakfast this morning. So I woke up this morning, I poured myself a dram of whiskey, went into the kitchen, downed that dram of whiskey, poured my Cocoa Pops into a bowl, added chocolate milk and whiskey to the mix, ate that breakfast, and boom, I was ready to go. And so I selectively present the evidence that makes me look as cool as possible, because I'm fairly sure a 40-year-old drinking whiskey and whiskey-infused Cocoa Pops is the coolest thing ever.
I can think of
but
nothing cooler.
If I was having this conversation with your mother, and I wanted to present myself as being lithe, sexual, and full of verve, I might talk about the calorific intake I took this morning to show that I am ready to do anything with your mum, and not mention the fact that the calorific intake was supplemented by whiskey and chocolate milk. And so I would selectively present the evidence to make me look like the kind of person your mother wants. Are you keeping count here, Joshua?
I'm not counting those ones, quite frankly. It needs to be something. You don't get to just work them in, Matthew. You got to say a thing, and then it's got to be just like your mum.
Just like your mum.
As the tag on the end. They need to be I'm calling foul on those ones. Anyway, errant. Errant evidence.
I probably could have done slightly more. So yes, so selective evidence is all about the presentation of data, and it's crucial to point out we are always selective with our citation of evidence. In part because if you cited all the evidence, you would bore people to death. You only cite what you take to be salient evidence. And so that's basically what we talk about when you're engaging in evidence selection. And there can be good evidence selection, where you only cite what you take to be the salient data in favor of a hypothesis, because that data then allows you to show why your claims are warranted. Or there's bad evidence selection, where you know there's salient data you should be presenting, but you don't because you want to make your position look good when maybe it's not. So yes, so moving on to errant data. Errant data is of course a case where there is always going to be at least some evidence in the pool of evidence for a particular hypothesis, which is either contrary to the claim you want to make or flat out contradicts it. Now, contrary data is to be expected in a lot of situations because hypotheses are basically ruled on the kind of data you put forward in favor of them. The pool of data is always going to contain at least some claims which cast doubt upon your particular hypothesis. Contradictory data is more of a problem. If there's contradictory data in your pool of evidence, you need to be able to explain that away. And you might take it that contradictory data is going to be problematic for a conspiracy theory, for example, if you can show that there's data which shows the conspiracy theory is unlikely. But under the rubric of contradictory data, we get interesting cases, say, like disinformation or false flag events, where you might be able, in the case of the conspiracy theory, to plausibly say that, look, if there really is a conspiracy in existence, then we can expect...
Uh-oh. He's frozen. Matthew, are you there?
I'm talking nicely. Can you not hear me, Joshua?
I can hear you
I
now. You're back. You're back.
I'm back.
Just as you were you were just talking about conspiracy theories leading the existence of a conspiracy theory leading one to possibly expect all sorts of shonkiness and contradictory information, and then you suddenly froze as though someone were attempting to silence you on the spot.
Interesting. And also suddenly the sound has gone completely out of whack again. So let me just do my whole... Yep. Just clicking on preferences solves the issue. I'm going to put a clap in here because I may need to edit around that sound issue. I'll put another clap in there because that wasn't loud enough. That's better. That's so much better. Alright, how should we adjust this? So in the case of a conspiracy theory, you can plausibly say that, look, if there's a disinformation campaign out there, then the conspirators will be producing data which is contradictory to the conspiracy theory to cast the conspiracy theory in a bad light. Now, any claim of disinformation needs to be judged on its own particular merits. So when we're talking about contradictory data, it's not implausible for the conspiracy theorists to say, well, look, in certain cases, contradictory data is evidence of the conspiracy because it shows that the conspirators are producing data to downplay the existence of their conspiracy. And we need to be able to judge that claim on a case-by-case basis.
So moving on, there's a bit of a... You talk about lucky evidence and contrast sort of fortunate and fortuitous and so on, which I have to admit, you lost me a little bit there. The distinction seemed a little bit fine, but yes, we do. I mean, one of the concerns is when a bit of evidence will come up that just seems a little bit too good to be true. It's just too lucky that the exact bit of evidence that proves exactly what you wanted should happen to be there. But what were the distinctions you were making with that sort of thing?
Okay, so this comes out of work by Buting and Taylor, who talk about how there's a class of evidence we might call fortuitous data, which is data which is so lucky it makes us doubt that it could possibly be true, i.e. it's going to be some kind of artifice designed to make a conspiracy theory look bad, for example. The example they use is the survival of al-Sagami's passport. So it seems very, very unlikely that the passport would survive.
Found in the wreckage of 9/11 of one of the hijackers?
Yes, precisely. And they go, look, we've got reason to think that the survival of the passport is suspiciously lucky in such a way that it might be indication that there is something suspicious about the official conspiratorial explanation of the event. Now, I think the problem with fortuitous data is that you kind of have to assume the existence of a conspiracy in this particular case to make the claim that the data is so lucky it can't be true. Because it's also quite possible it's just lucky data, or what I call fortunate data, in that, yes, there's a very low likelihood that A, the passport would survive, and B, it would be found so close to ground zero by someone who knew what it meant and thus be able to give it to the authorities. But just because that's unlikely, and thus lucky, that doesn't tell us there's anything suspicious about the luckiness there. Sometimes that's the way that the stats play out, or the pie crumbles. Sometimes unlikely things still happen. And so I don't think we can make a distinction between data being so fortuitous that it makes us suspicious of that data versus data just happening to be lucky without already making assumptions about conspiracies operating in the background. So I don't think the fortuitous data distinction is actually a particularly useful one.
Then you move on to false evidence, and this is when you actually get into the disinformation and so on, isn't it? Information that's not just errant, but that's deliberately fabricated
fabricated information designed to make some position look good when actually it wouldn't be.
And then finally, secret data, which doesn't require any special explanation, I suppose, but that is something that we do see a bit in conspiracy theories, where people say there is evidence, I can't tell you what it is.
And crucially, secret evidence is used against conspiracy theories. So I think this is a great example of the double standard that often gets used against conspiracy theories and conspiracy theorists. So, for example, in the build-up to the invasion of Iraq in 2003, Donald Rumsfeld said, look, we have good evidence that the Saddam Hussein regime is producing weapons of mass destruction. You can't see it because it's classified information, but trust us. It's the kind of thing that warrants our actions. And of course, it turns out that actually when that evidence came out, it wasn't particularly good. It was highly suspicious. But Rumsfeld used that evidence to go, look, people who say that we don't have the evidence, they're just vapid conspiracy theorists. And so secret evidence is used both in support of conspiracy theories with respect to, we have an anonymous source in the CIA who tells us that the CIA knew more about the attacks of 9/11 than they've publicly let on. But they also get used by members of influential institutions to go, look, we have secret evidence that tells us that these conspiracy theories are vapid, and no, you can't look at it. Trust us. We know what we're doing.
So all of these types of evidence that you go over are things that people have claimed are problematic about conspiracy theories. Conspiracy theories are inherently suspicious or illogical because they use selective information, because they use errant information, because they use information that seems too good to be true, because they use secret information, and so on. Was that meant to be like an exhaustive list of all the things that people have said is wrong with conspiracy theories evidence, or is it just the ones that you've encountered and the ones that you've chosen to address in this paper?
So it's going to be more the latter than the former. So no, I don't think I've produced an exhaustive list of kinds of evidence used for or against conspiracy theories and then analyze them piece by piece. I think it's broad enough that the analysis means that you could then extend it to other types of evidence that people might go, oh, but what about this? What about that? And where I think my work is interesting here is that I focus on the principle. So if we're going to claim that conspiracy theorists use evidence badly, we need to show that they are abusing some principle of evidence citation and use with respect to their conspiracy theories. And my argument is, if we look at the kinds of evidence typically associated with conspiracy theories, you can find that many conspiracy theorists use that evidence in a principled way, and you can also show that people have been unprincipled in the use of the same kind of evidence when it comes to abusing conspiracy theorists and their conspiracy theories. So A, we need to look at the principle and say, is the evidence being abused? And B, we've got to stop being two-faced about it and only showing opprobrium for the abuse of that principle when it comes to conspiracy theories, and ignoring the abuse of that principle when we're so-called debunking a conspiracy theory.
The video went slightly sketchy here and freeze-framed just perfectly on you doing the air quotes then. It was quite a nice effect. Anyway, now I noticed when I was honestly reading this paper right from start to finish, poring over every detail, that I think it was when you were talking about secret evidence, you start talking about evidence that being perhaps not that good, but that people want to believe it, or talking about why people might believe these things or might want to believe these things, which sounds like at times it starts veering into psychology more than philosophy. Do you find that's what's happening, and is it a problem if it does happen from time to time?
So as an epistemologist talking about belief and how we justify belief, you're always going to have a certain amount of folk psychology operating in the background, because you can't really talk about belief without talking about the people who hold beliefs, i.e. the psychology of the individuals involved. Now, as I like to stress all the time, I'm not a psychologist. I don't even play one on TV. But I think there are certain folk psychological notions, or you might take to be common psychological notions, held by most academics, which are broadly shared, and you can use this kind of low-level folk psychological analysis to engage in your discussion of the epistemology of belief. But yes, there's always the danger that you're veering into psychology. I would like to claim that the things I say which veer into psychology are well supported, but of course any academic who's not a psychologist making psychological claims will make exactly that claim because they don't want to be questioned about the folk psychology they're operating with.
Well, fair enough. So the last thing I wanted to ask was that sort of the whole what would you say theme of the paper seems to be that some people say conspiracy theories are irrational because they use these kinds of evidence, and it's irrational to use these kinds of evidence. And aside from, first of all, as you point out, they do tend to be inconsistent with that, and that there are other non-conspiratorial theories that use those kinds of evidence just as much, and we don't criticize them the same way we criticize conspiracy theories. But another thing I wondered, would it be better when people make these sorts of claims if they were to soften them a little, and rather than saying conspiracy theories are irrational and should be treated as such because they use selective evidence or what have you, would it be a more valid thing to say simply that they're not inherently irrational, but we should perhaps be more suspicious of them, in the same way that, say, Occam's razor says that we should be preferential towards a theory that is simpler and has fewer moving parts? But that doesn't mean that a simple theory is always better than a complex theory. It's just sort of a rule of thumb to guide your investigation. Would you be happier if people started making these sorts of claims more in the rule of thumb mode?
Yes, I think it would be a much better situation if people went, well, look, when evidence is abused, or there's the appearance of evidence abuse, and we need to do further investigation to find out whether it is the case, that gives us a prima facie reason to at least be suspicious about the claims being made. But of course, the consequence of that is that if we're going to be principled in our use of rules of thumb, we have to apply them in both directions. So if you're going to go, look, evidence of evidence selection at least makes us think that we need to go and look at the total pool of evidence and see whether any evidence has been left out to make a claim look warranted when it might not be. We don't want to only be applying that rule to these things called conspiracy theories. We want to apply that rule of thumb to any theoretical construct or hypothesis that we're looking at. And so if we're going to go, look, these are just rules of thumb, and they're reasons for us to at least be suspicious on first glance of explanations that use evidence of this type, we also need to make sure that we apply the principle equally and don't just observe them when it comes to things called conspiracy theories.
Yes, yeah. I think not only are the claims they're making stronger than they should be, but they're not consistently applied. I always think when it comes to the rule of thumb type thing like Occam's razor, it always seems there are, I don't know, sort of three stages that people go through. You get the stage one philosopher of hearing about Occam's razor and going, that's an interesting thing. It is a rule of thumb we should bring in mind. And then you get or at least it's an interesting sort of rule. And then you get stage two is when people have heard about it and also know that it's not actually a rule of philosophy, it's just a rule of thumb. Because I've seen discussions online where someone, especially in relation to conspiracy theories, I remember the last time I heard it was a Gamergate sort of thing, where someone said, someone made the claim that some victim of Gamergate, it was all a false flag and they were making this stuff up, and someone replied, well, certainly assuming that the whole thing is a setup Occam's razor would prefer the theory that it's just a plain attack on them rather than some complicated false flag. And the reply was immediately indignant, ah, but Occam's razor proves nothing. It's not a proper rule. It's just a rule of thumb. And then I think the third stage is like, well, yes, no, it is a rule of thumb, but rule of thumbs are useful. You know,
Yeah,
it's not disproving
like
anything,
heuristics.
but it's a useful thing to guide your initial endeavours. So yes, I think those possibly would be a more useful way of phrasing things. Now I've run out of questions, and we're running out of time, I suppose. Is there anything you'd like to? Any closing words you'd like to say in reference to your brand new, excitingly published paper in a reputable philosophical journal?
You can find it online on my website.
The paper itself, or a link to it?
The paper itself. So I'm allowed to host a version of the paper on my personal website. So it can't be the final published version with the right page numbers and things, but I can publish the text online, and as long as I make sure it links to the journal in question.
Oh, well, there you go.
So if you want to read it, you just can go to episto.org, click on the publications page in the menu, and then there you will find it for your reading pleasure. Now, of course, if you want to cite it, you probably want to download the version from Springer, which will require you to have institutional access so you can get the right page numbers for those references. But you can read the paper now if you so desire it. And if you don't desire to read the paper, then I just don't know what you're doing with your life. I mean, really, what are you doing with your life where you don't want to spend a morning reading a philosophical paper published in an arcane journal which may have no effect upon your life in any way, shape, or form? I mean, really, what are you doing with your life?
Something must have gone terribly, terribly wrong for a person not to want to do that, and they really should reevaluate pretty much all of their life choices up until this point.
Yeah, because I'm assuming people are reading philosophy papers all day, every day. It's what they do between bouts of watching interminably boring episodes of Game of Thrones.
It's what all the cool kids are up to. I've had my first proper brush with YouTube stars now. One of my oldest son came across the videos of what appeared to me to be some guy goofing off in his living room, until I noticed that he had this one video had 10 million views, and another one was followed with shots of the guy presenting stuff at the Teen Choice Awards and standing in a stadium in front of screaming fans. And I was like, holy crap, this is actually kind of a big thing that the kids are into these days.
Who is this person?
His name is Collins Key. He was apparently became famous. He was a finalist on America's Got Talent. He did magic, but most of his videos are just him doing goofy stuff that his many viewers have suggested he do, and just messing around with him and his brother, who wears way too much makeup, I have to say. Like
there's nothing wrong with wearing makeup.
There's nothing wrong. No, there's nothing wrong with wearing makeup, but it's of the sort of the stage makeup for camera type looking makeup, of the sort of makeup that you wear when you want it to not look like that you're wearing makeup, but he still looks like he's wearing makeup, if you see what I mean.
Maybe, Joshua, he may be an alien shape-shifting reptile who's just trying to look as human as possible.
You never know. Yep, no, maybe I shouldn't. Maybe I should be more
tolerant of drinking alien
shape-shifting
reptiles.
Lawdz. Yes, no, you're right. I apologise.
It does occur that given these people have 10 million viewers and the like, the next generation's consumption of media is not going to resemble our generation's consumption of media. It's going to be a very, and I mean radically different media landscape in 25 years' time. Our generation really has no idea about YouTube celebrity and what counts as being an exciting show on YouTube. It's actually astounding to see how big these people are and how many members of our generation end up going,
I don't get it.
I don't get it. And yet 10 million people arguably can't be that wrong.
Yeah, well, I mean, that was... I first remember sort of getting into this. It must have been a cracked.com podcast where they were talking about basically this exact phenomena, that people our age have no idea what the next generation are doing when they mention, hey, guess who the most subscribed YouTube channel in the entire world is? Used to be Rihanna, international pop star that everyone's heard of. Now it's PewDiePie, some Swedish guy playing computer games in his living room. And he's the most popular. I don't know if he's still the most popular YouTube star after the whole recent Nazi tomfoolery where he was saying various anti-Semitic things. Although I see he recently did put out a statement saying, after the Charlottesville business, saying, okay, yeah, I did used to make sort of little kind of Nazi-ish jokes because I thought it was just kind of silly because Nazis are from the past and don't really exist anymore. I'm not going to be doing that anymore because now I realise they do kind of still exist, so I better just shut my big
a large section, well, I say a large section, a significant section of his audience have chastised him for giving in to political correctness by doing that.
Yeah, that's a shame. But yes, no, it is
so
very
basically the Nazis win in any which way now. It's quite disturbing. We live in a world where Nazis win.
But yes, no, actually, I've also been reading stuff recently talking about how the fact that the bottom appears to be falling out of the internet advertising market, which again is going to...
Your bottom's falling out of the internet advertising market.
Frequently and with great gusto. But so that's think there's going to be another massive shift, I think, perhaps in how people consume entertainment on the internet caused by that, because bitch better have my money, essentially, if we're going to return to
I mean, a lot of internet YouTube stars, as if there's a non-internet YouTube. the old
that's when they come to yourself and perform their show in front of you. Yeah.
Are heavily relying on Patreons and such like to support themselves, and so we actually we're going back to a patron style culture, which is quite fascinating.
Yes, although then you get the whole granularity of it all. You're people paying just for the stars they want to see. How everybody seems to be wanting to set up their own streaming service now, what with Disney taking all their stuff off Netflix, and people seem to think that everyone's going to pay for all the streaming stuff to get all the stuff they want, and I think a lot of people have been saying, no, I don't want to do that.
Well, especially since at the moment the reason why people are happy to, say, spend their money on Netflix is that one simple fee gets them access to almost everything they want, and it's easier than going to one of those dodgy websites and having to work out which video feeds are good versus which ones are bad and how to make them play on your TV. But once you start going back to having to belong to 5 or 6 different streaming services to get the content you want, people are going to go, what's more convenient than subscribing to 5 different services? Oh, that dodgy website that gives me all the access to media for free. So, no, I suspect these little closed ecosystems, which are proliferating, are going to fail. And people will go back to Amazon and Netflix once again once they realize they spent a very large amount of money on infrastructure that no one is paying to use.
Yes. So it'll all just come down to which one of them's showing Newsradio, I guess. Do any of the streaming services do Newsradio? I don't even know. I don't think Netflix does.
Yeah, I mean, I own it all on DVD.
There we go. I can no longer play DVDs because my DVD player has been shelved and I only have a PlayStation 4 to play things on, and the PlayStation 4, to my great surprise, doesn't support DVD anymore. Or doesn't at all, never did.
So it's only a Blu-ray player?
Only a Blu-ray player, yeah. I was quite surprised the first time I chucked a DVD and it said it doesn't support, and I was like, really? And went on the internet and it was like, yeah, they basically... PS4, that Sony was like, DVDs, those are yesterday's news, daddy-o. And apparently have been saying, oh yeah, we might add in DVD support for the last 3 years or so, and it doesn't look like it's actually going to happen. Weird.
Yeah. I had no idea. I just kind of assumed that almost all Blu-ray players were de facto DVD players as well.
If it can play a Blu-ray, surely it can play a DVD, but no, there we go. But anyway, we've moved now into the pop culture techno rambling that we do tend to trail off into. One thing though, mentioning Newsradio, of course, Newsradio, another person who was in Newsradio was Joe Rogan. And Joe Rogan is quite the conspiracy theorist. We really should talk about him one of these days.
We should do a Joe Rogan special.
Or at least celebrity conspiracy theorists, maybe. I don't know. Is there enough to talk about Joe Rogan for an hour?
No, but there is enough to talk about all the conspiracy theorists that exist within the pop culture world. I'm actually not quite sure what word I was going for after pop culture. I should just go all the conspiracy theorists in the pop culture.
That sounded much better. Yes, oh, there you go. Watch the space. Maybe we've already decided what next episode would be, and you heard it here first. But yes, the hour draws late, but it does here. I assume it's, midday in Romania, or 11 o'clock?
It's about to be 1 p.m.
1 p.m. Oh gosh, my time zones are all up the wazoo. Daylight savings starts here in about 3 weeks, I think. I think it's before the election hits. So I don't know.
Yes, I think I'll be back by the time the daylight savings would cause strife for this podcast, I think.
Oh well, there we go. So we've reached the end, which means I should really just wrap things up by saying you've been listening to the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy, and that my name is Josh Addison, and that you could contact me on Twitter if you wanted to with the username MonkeyFluids. You could also look for my YouTube channel, where I also go by the name MonkeyFluids, although you're probably better off just searching YouTube for the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy. You could make me a video star as big as Collins Key, the ridiculously perky white-toothed American teen. Well, it looks like he's in his 20s, to be honest. Who's beloved by millions, apparently. And I've forgotten which direction to point when we're on the video thing, so I'll point I'll point in both directions. That guy, and one of them's going to be
Jesse
correct.
Hand.
His name's Dr. Matthew R. Extentith. He's in Romania at the moment, and if you wanted to contact him, you could do what, Matthew?
Go to my Twitter, so Conspiracism, or you can go to my other Twitter, which is HO or you could visit my website, episto.org. That's EPISTO.org, episto.org, for all of your conspiracy theory needs.
Yep, so that's, as Matthew mentioned, that's where you'll find his paper and other works. That's assuming you don't choose to reject Matthew and all his works. You can...
Just like your mum.
Not bad. I'll allow that one. Yep. Actually, that's a poor reflection on you, surely, if my mum rejected you and all your works. But anyway,
I know it's not my best work.
No, but nevertheless, I'd say it counts. You've got that. You've got various blog postings, less frequent than they used to be, perhaps, but you are a busy man in a foreign clime with things to do, so that's perhaps quite understandable. And of course, it's a place where, one of the many places where this podcast and attendant video is mirrored. The podcast's available on iTunes, it's available on Stitcher, it's available on a bunch of other places. It's hosted specifically, he said, clearing his throat to conceal the fact that he just hiccuped. It's hosted on podbean.com, so its real home is at the website conspiracism.podbean.com, but you can basically get it anywhere reputable podcasts are serviced.
And if you're getting it from an unreputable podcast provider, please do get in contact. We want to know where the cool kids get their podcasts from.
So all that remains now is to go out on a song. Now, the song I've chosen is called Evidence Song. It's by the good Lawdz. We have used it before. I'm fairly certain it's the song we used on the episode a while ago when we just talked about evidence the whole time again. But quite frankly, I can think of nothing more suitable. So we're just gonna go out on it again. As you listen to the harmonious strains of the Evidence Song by the good Lawdz, I will just say goodbye.
And I will say la rivedere.
But you didn't trail off amusingly at the end.
La rivedere.
We're all just a little bit non-committal and vague at the moment. Non-committal and vague. Just no, that doesn't even work, as I'm not just like your mum at all. I'm just going to give up. I'm just going to say good night, everybody.
Good night.
You've been listening to the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy, starring Josh Addison and Matthew R. Extentith, and produced by Matthew R. Extentith. If you've enjoyed the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy, why not contribute to our Patreon or Podbean patron page? And you can contact us on podcastconspiracy@gmail.com. That's podcastconspiracy@gmail.com.